Thanks, Dudney. Great to be with you, everybody. My name is Tim Pelkey, and I'm the Director of Foundation Grants at Big Brother, Big Sister of America. And to describe myself, I'm a 40-ish male, blonde hair, reddish beard, and let's see, a he series pronouns. I'll turn it over to Gene to introduce themselves next.
Hi, everyone. Gene Roque-Partain from Search Institute. He, him pronouns, a white male getting older with a gray beard. So that's probably the best way to describe me. And I'll turn it over to Ellie.
Hi, everyone. Ellie Martinez, Big Brothers Big Sisters in Richmond, Virginia. I use she, her, and hers. I'm excited to be here for a description. Latina female, long brown hair, glasses, and a black Big Brothers Big Sisters pullover. Jennifer, I'll turn it to you.
Hey everybody, I'm Jennifer Davis, Big Brothers Big Sisters of East Tennessee. I am she series, red hair, white shirt, Southern accent.
All right, let me give you a brief overview of our presentation. We'll start out with an introduction, and then we'll move into Gene will provide an overview of the developmental relationships framework. Then we'll talk a little bit about Big Brother Big Sisters journey with family engagement over the last 5 years. And then we're really privileged to have Jennifer and Ellie with us as well to talk about what this looks like in implementation on the ground. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Starting today, I'm going to play a little bit of a big video segment. And this is actually from our Good Habits for Great Relationships series, which you'll see linked out in the handouts. This series actually asks our parents, our youth, what does it look like, just from a family perspective to live out that developmental relationships framework. So I'm going to cue the video.
If I feel like I'm going to give up, she'll start to encourage me more and let me know that I can do it and just don't give up. And I could do anything I put my mind to.
We definitely push each other when we know we can make it. If we have a goal, if we have a personal goal, we definitely do push each other so we can reach that goal.
And so I always tell my daughter and my wife, I want you guys to bring out the best of me. And I feel like we do that collectively, but perfection is not the goal. We say it's just to be better today than you were yesterday. And as long as you can say that, then you're making progress.
I tell them, I said, right now it's like a matter of life and death. I said, you want to be better than me. I said, you want to do better. So.
But yeah, she always pushes me to do good in school and get good grades and stuff.
And it's I really just had a raw conversation. I said, look, I said, by you being a black young man, I said, you have to work harder because of the thing, what people say or what they think. So you have to want it. I said, education is very, very important. And what I say, tell them?
If you don't have education, you don't have anything.
You know how some parents just stay on their child, just make them frustrated, don't make them want to do anything. I don't want him to feel that way. So I'm trying to find a balance right now. And I see that he's really trying. And I tell him as well, and I told him the other day, I said, I know you want to make the honor roll. I said, and I'm very proud of you for that. I said, but if you can, it's okay. I said, but do the best that you, I said, if you do the best that you can do and you feel that you have done your best, I said, that's good for me. I'm good with that.
If they're not going in the right direction, I might lead them well, what did you do that made me upset? And then kind of lead them back that way. And then I try not to be negative about it. I try to stay positive. But yeah, so I just try to be positive about it and steer them in the right direction, give them what they could have done differently.
I'll let them know, if you guys are doing good in school and, what I'm saying, I feel like, you're trying to better yourself and stuff like that. I'll get you whatever you need, whatever you want. I'll bust my butt off to do it.
Sometimes he's a good student and an athlete, but he has self-doubt. And I tell him all the time, you're really good at this. Don't worry about what everybody else thinks. Do what you think is right.
Well, she'll tell me how to reflect and calm down, and she'll ask me what happens and what to do next time if I'm ever in that situation again.
As far as life mistakes go, they will definitely talk about them, and we'll talk about it, and we'll say like, hey, you kind of messed up there, and we'll communicate how I can fix it and do better next time.
I could say, well, when I was younger, this is what happened to me, and depending on how my situation turned out, I let them know, like, kind of guide them either towards what I did or away, depending on how the situation panned out. I hope that they know that for whatever they need me for, I am here, good or bad.
And what about holding each other accountable?
We do hold each other accountable.
Accountability is not a one-way street, it's a what?
No, it's a two-way street.
Okay.
So if I'm holding him accountable, he's holding me accountable. If I'm holding her accountable, she's holding me accountable.
When you have a problem, when there's a problem that's created, what do you want to do?
Communicate.
And then after that, what do you want to do? Fix it?
Fix it.
Right?
We
Because
definitely
we
do
can
want
all
to fix
talk
it.
about the problem and point it out, right?
Yes,
But
we
the
can.
goal is to fix it, right?
Yes.
We talk about this a lot. We talk about two-way street, right? Because a lot of times, in my experience, accountability has been something that adult is supposed to, kind of, teach the kid. But I believe that it's a two-way street. And so, I think people that care about you talk to you. And so if you care about someone, you're always wanting them to improve, because it's not that they're not doing good, but it's always that you can continuously improve, you can continuously do better.
I love those videos because they really do tell the stories of real life, youth and parents from our program. And it really sheds a light on that third wheel of the mentoring relationship. We talk a lot about our littles, we talk a lot about our youth, but we don't talk a lot about the parents and families that they come from. And there are just amazing stories of overcoming and the parenting that happens, through these relationships, often in very challenging circumstances. And so as a network, we're really focused on not viewing parents in an adversarial way, but viewing them as partners in the mentoring relationship, where our big as well as the parent are all working to help youth advance and really reach their full potential with that. And we've been privileged over the last going on 5 years now to partner with Search Institute. Search Institute has been our thought partner in this whole process, and we'll talk about more of the tools and things that we've developed through this later. But I'm going to turn it over to Gene to introduce the developmental relationships framework to you.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be with everyone and to talk about this. And many of you may have heard about the developmental relationships and the work we've been doing around the kind of relationships young people need to thrive, and the way we talk about those in terms of relationships with teachers and relationships with other folks. And we've used those with Big Brothers, Big Sisters to think about how do we think about relationships, not only within the family, but also in the building the relationships between agencies and the families. And so that's been sort of a framework that we've used. I want to just spend a couple of minutes introducing the frameworks for those of you who may not be familiar with it, and see how we've talked about it. So for us, we've started using the metaphor of roots to talk about what relationships do in our lives. If you think about roots and talk about roots and think about how plants get so many of their nutrients through roots. And if we think about that, begin to think about all the comparisons you can make between roots and relationships, and begin to understand all the different ways that plants depend on roots for relationships. And I've got at the bottom the fact that not all roots are the same kind of system. So kids have different webs of networks of relationships that do different things, and that some relationships give strength to withstand storms. Different roots have different functions for plants. And if we have some master gardeners in the audience, they could spend us a whole bunch of time telling us about all the different things that roots do and how they bring nutrients, how they keep the trees grounded, and then how some roots actually go out and seek other things that the plant needs. And so all of these different things that roots do, and you could spend a whole hour just talking about how roots are like relationships and relationships are like roots. And so we find it to be a really fascinating metaphor to think about. And here at the summit, if you listen to the opening session, you know that the idea of Ubuntu has come up a couple of times, and I love in the next slide how it's talked about many different ways. One of the people who used it a lot and introduced it to us was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And one of the ways he described Ubuntu was, he said, a person is a person through other persons. The idea that we actually don't become who we are unless we're in a relationship with other people. And so at Search, we've been trying to operationalize that to say, if that's true, what does it really look like? What do those relationships really look like? And how do we begin to understand what relationships do for us in a more scientific way? And so we began to say that actually relationships shape our identity, our sense of agency, and our commitments to the community and our sense of purpose. And so they're the close connections through which young people discover who they gain abilities to shape their lives, and they learn how to interact and contribute to the world around them. And again, you could think about, and we could have a breakout sessions here and talk about all the ways that your mentors, the bigs and the other mentors, the way they shape, help young people discover who they are. They help young people shape their lives and then contribute to the world. And we could talk about that. So beginning to imagine that and beginning to get really articulate about what that is, and then begin to break it down to say, it's not just one thing we do. There's, as the video showed around challenging growth, there's different parts of a relationship. So there's 5 different elements we've identified. We'll go through these fairly quickly. There's a handout in the materials for the session that shows these in more detail. And I just want to walk through them pretty quickly, and so you can see the elements, and in the parentheses, you'll see the number of parents who say these are things that they do with their own children. So we'll just fly through these and you can see those differently. The idea of this is it helps parents and helps others of us begin to think about what's in a relationship and begin to be more intentional in them. So expressing care, showing each other that we matter to each other by being dependable, listening, believing in each other, being warm, encouraging each other. And you heard some of that even in the discussion of challenging growth. And so the percentages that Tim will put up will reflect that. And this is one of the more common foundational elements of any relationship, if you think about it. The next one is around challenging growth, which we saw the video of families talking about that in terms of how they expect each other to be their best. They stretch them, they hold them accountable. They talk about failures and help them learn through mistakes. And again, many families already are doing this as part of their relationship. The third one is providing support. The notion that we do tangible things to complete tasks and achieve goals in life, helping people navigate systems, empower them, building confidence to work on things, advocating for things when they need it. And this often happens in situations where kids are face challenges and the systems are hard. The families are facing hard systems. And so many of you in your mentoring programs and mentoring relationships find yourself having to advocate for young people and their families, and then setting boundaries to keep them on track. So again, all of these things are part of what happens. Sharing power. Sometimes we forget that every relationship has a power dynamic in it. And sometimes we don't like to talk about it. And yet it's there. It starts with respect, of respecting the other person as person, including them in decisions, working with them to solve problems by collaborating, and then letting them lead, giving them a voice, creating opportunities to take action. And this is one where some families struggle more than others, and where in fact teachers and students struggle and how that's shared. Reminding you that sharing power is not giving up power. It's about how do you give people a voice and give them responsibility so that they can learn and grow. And then finally, it's about expanding possibilities. And lots of mentoring relationships have this as a central priority, about inspiring them to see new opportunities for themselves, broadening horizons, connecting them to people who can help them learn and grow and see new things. And that's what a core role of a mentor is, of course. And families often struggle to do the expanding possibilities because their world is caught up in just making it through day by day. And so all of those things are things that mentors can do, and families can do as well. And it doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of money. A lot of this can happen in your own home, in your own neighborhood, all of those things as well. So just to remember that. So I've gone through those really fast. You'll think about those, but I want you just to reflect on the families that you serve in your agencies and reflect quickly on those. And so if you have a mobile phone or your own phone handy, I'm going to put up a reflection tool that we have. I'm going to take me a second here to do that, but we're going to get there. And go to Mentimeter, a Menti, which is a poll we have. And my system checked me out on this. We'll get back in. And if you go to the poll that Dudley's going to put in a link that Dudley's going to put in your chat, you'll find this poll as soon as I get it up. And it's just to ask you, which two of these 5 elements of a developmental relationship do you see as the most common in the families you work with? And I'm going to quickly share my screen so you can see the results as they come up. I think I can do that. Tim, can I do that? I don't know if I can or not. Otherwise, I'll just wait. Maybe I won't do that because I think it's a little complicated here. I forgot about that part. So I'm going to just tell you the results as they get done. So as I'm looking here, these may change as more people fill out their thing, but go ahead and finish up. I'll give you a little more time. People are picking again. You can pick 2, so there are families that would have others. The most common thing that people are picking so far is that the families emphasize expressing care and providing support. And then the third one would be expanding possibilities. So you can continue to put those in there. I'll come back to those as we have time later, potentially just to see that. I see that same pattern emerging, but different families and different agencies may see different strengths there. So just a quick check in there to see how people are doing and thinking about it. Going back to the slides, then I will continue on. And so it's just interesting to say, so when we look at kids who say, or parents and who say they have, kids who have these relationships, and other studies we've done with kids and parents both reporting in on their stuff, we see that kids who have those kind of strong developmental relationships with their families, with their parents, are twice as likely to set and work towards goals, be committed to and enjoy learning, and aspire to continue their education. And I'll just show some others. So there's twice as likely to do those things. On the next slide, you'll see that they're 3 times as likely to feel like they belong in their community, like there's home, and there's just a sense of belonging, which is a really critical piece. And then the last one, we put together a set of characteristics of whether a child's developing social emotional strength, a whole bunch of social emotional strengths. And we find that when kids have that strong relationship with their parenting adults, they're 10 times more likely to have that foundation of critical social emotional strengths to get them through the world, to get them through life. And so we see across multiple studies, and we're not the only ones who've seen this, that when kids have a deeper, strong relationship with their families, beginning early in life, we say as early as grade 3 up through adolescence, that those relationships are critical for their growth into adulthood. Again, I'll say here, though, it's not just parent relationships. Obviously, mentoring relationships, other relationships matter just as much, or are also powerful in kids' lives. So again, we're talking about the web of relationships that young people need to thrive. What I'm suggesting, though, is that we also need to remember that as mentoring relationships are critical for kids' lives, family relationships are also important. And sometimes we forget that in our work of emphasizing mentoring relationships. And actually, as we think about parenting, oftentimes we actually forget that parents have relationships with kids. They're not just managers of kids' lives. And so many of the current, and the next slide, actually, when you look at a lot of the parenting literature and the way we approach parents as in our programs for parents, we actually think about many of the approaches to parenting actually forget about the relationship aspect of parenting. Parenting theories and programs tend to focus on cognitive, behavioral, and emotional domains. In other words, we're teaching parents how to control or manage kids with limited attention to the interpersonal and relational aspects. So if you think about that, it's actually pretty challenging to think about it that way, and problematic to think about it that way. So there's a growing number of folks, including Search Institute, that's focusing more on the attachment side of parenting and how do we help parents continue to stay connected to and relating to the parents. One of my favorite quotes is on the next slide. Alison Gottlieb, who's a distinguished professor at UC Berkeley, said, "Parent is actually not a verb." Think about that. It's not a form of work, and it isn't and shouldn't be directed toward the goal of sculpting a child into a particular kind of adult. Instead, to be a parent, to care for a child, is to be part of a profound and uniquely human relationship, to engage in a particular kind of love. And so that's the attitude we've been trying to build into thinking about what it means to be in relationship with parents who are in relationship with their child, and think about a relationship-centered approach to engaging with mentors as partners, and to engage as parents as partners in a mentoring relationship. So if you think about that, how might that change us? And we'll skip the next slide just because of our time and move to a set of principles that have emerged over the last 5 years, around in our work with Big Brothers Big Sisters, around how we think about relationships, a relationship-centered approach to partnering with families. And there's a handout in your materials that has a little more detail on these. So I'll just walk through them quickly, and as we're talking about what's actually happening in agencies, you hear these kind of things reflected. The first thing is that we're shifting the conversation to say relationships are the heartbeat of our partnership with families. In other words, they're not there just to enroll kids and make sure they get to things. Really, it's about how do we build relationship with those parenting adults and see them as our partners, and we get to know them and they get to know us. And that has all kinds of implications for how we spend time with them, how do we interact with them when we talk to them, all of those kinds of things. Investing in those relationships with families actually strengthens the other relationships. It strengthens the relationships with the mentor. It strengthens the relationships with the young person who's part of the mentoring relationships, and actually can strengthen relationships within a mentoring agency as people begin to get to know the families and learn that. It requires getting to know, value, and trust families across time, not just for them to trust the agency, but for you to trust the families. And because trust is at the heart of a relationship. It involves welcoming, including, and valuing families from all backgrounds and walks of life. And I know many of you are working on engaging and involving young people from all walks of life. And that needs to extend to how do we think about valuing families who have those similar kind of experiences. And I know many of you are already doing that. Honoring, tapping families' strengths, even when they have challenges. All of our families have challenges. My family has big challenges. We're all dealing with challenges. And sometimes we focus only on the challenges that families have without recognizing the strengths that they have, the strengths that maybe what's getting them through those challenges. So how do we begin to understand, recognize, and live into and celebrate those challenges and tap those challenges, the strengths, and tap those strengths. And then how do we begin to see those leadership opportunities that tap those strengths and ensure that we're tapping those, and then that becomes part of how the agency becomes responsive to and reflective of the community's priorities, because the families are part of the community. Number 7 is connecting families with each other, because that becomes part of their social capital, part of their supports, part of their networks. Many of the families feel isolated within communities. They don't know where else to go to. We think of that a lot in terms of how we connect them with other resources, which is number 8. But how do we see those social connections with other families as being part of what we bring to them as an agency that's a connecting agencies? And then finally, recognize that relationships are not set in stone, that families grow, we grow and their kids grow. And so how do we begin to recognize that that's part of what the process is all about? And so in conclusion, when we think about nurturing developmental relationships, we think about nurturing relationships with families, which is how do we get to know them as an agency and build those relationships. We think about nurturing relationships within families, which is how do we help parents and their children develop relationships. We have a program at Search Institute that we've used with Big Brothers Big Sisters called Keep Connected to help families at the middle school age build those relationships and connect around the elements of developmental relationships. There are lots of other resources as well to help families connect within the family. So how do we help with that as part of strengthening the overall web of relationships that the young people experience? And then finally, how do we think about building relationships among families in the same ways we think about wraparound supports? How do we think about wraparound relationships for families? And so that as we're thinking about the network and web of supports for families, how do we then do that as part of a relational web as well? So I know I flew through that, but I think the people who have the more interesting stories to tell are the folks on our panel who are doing the work on the ground and bringing those developmental relationships to life. So Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you and your colleagues in Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Thanks, Gene. And it really does provide a good theoretical context in terms of helping us understand as we shift into kind of the implementation side. So why was Big Brother Big Sister interested in family engagement? Well, back in 2017, we implemented our Bigger Impact strategic plan. And through that, this was really based on kind of three main factors. One being that research demonstrates that stronger families lead to longer mentoring relationships, which is a big area of emphasis for us as a network. Also, coordinated wraparound service supports empower families towards positive outcomes. And we found a lot of our agencies were already doing this type of work, but really providing support and encouragement just in terms of doing it better was a big emphasis. And then the third, it really does provide a shared language to use in conversations with donors, board members, and community partners that really we as an organization are uplifting not just youth, but also entire families through the programming that we do. Alongside this, we implemented back in 2018 the Risk and Protective Inventory. And this grew out of the 2013 Role of Risk study funded by the Gates Foundation, which we call the RPI. And it's a 59-item assessment that addresses risk and protective factors. And it's really, a great tool just in terms of getting kind of a point in time sense of where is a family at in terms of what are their strengths and what are some areas of challenge that they're facing. So after the initial intake survey, this is conducted annually with families throughout their time in the program. It's not something everybody fills out, but over time, we've actually seen a huge increase in terms of participation. It was rolled out as optional in 2017, but became really more widespread, especially with its inclusion in our federal grant recipients in 2018. And the results are used to support both individual matches in terms of helping connect them with wraparound supports, but also as a way of informing agencies' program decisions and also a way to support funding proposals. Just for example, if educational need is an issue that we're seeing at an agency, then that can be something that programmatically the interventions are developed around. For example, our Seattle office implemented a tutoring program as a result. And so, with the RPI, you can see some national results actually here, how we compare to some national stats. And it's really interesting, just overall, compared to, national averages, our youth are 29% more likely to live in a single parent home. They are more likely to worry, 28% more likely to be sad or cry or be lonely, twice as likely. So as you look through this list, you can see just some of the challenges that our youth and families face, as a network as a whole. And one of the things that's really interesting is we dug a little deeper into these numbers. Now that we've used the RPI for 5 years, we can actually look at trends across our network. And one of the really interesting things in looking at this is obviously COVID in 2020. How did that impact our totals? Because each year, we've had at least 7,900 parents filling out this survey. And we found that the issue of worry and anxiety actually has increased by 25%. It reached a peak of 60% in 2021. I mean, that's a huge increase in terms of just emotional regulation about children wanting to get revenge when they've been wronged. 24% increase there. My child seems lonely, sad, or cries a lot. 24% increase there. Missing school, so truancy an issue, and you can obviously see that affected by COVID as well. And then difficulty with emotional regulation, 21% increase there. And these are really fascinating numbers, as we considered, just overall, trends, but also, informing program decisions going forward. And so that led to, also consideration of wraparound services for our network. And you can see some great pictures that our Richmond and East Tennessee office has shared with us from some of the family events that they've been able to do over the years. What types of wraparound services do our agencies provide? And we biannually do what we call the Network Snapshot Survey. So we will have 2022 results later this year. But what we have found is that a lot of what is provided directly by agencies is, holiday gift giving, tickets to events, LGBTQ supports, connection to maybe food services through a food drive, things like that. But the bulk of wraparound service supports are actually happening through partnerships. And can't emphasize that enough, just how important those partnerships are in terms of supporting families, because especially for you as an organization, unless you exist as part of a larger wraparound network, you may not be the best equipped to provide vision services or tutoring services, but there may be other partners in your community that can provide those as an enrichment. And so this really tells kind of the story of our journey, starting back in 2018 with that rollout of the RPI. We were very fortunate through grant funding to be able to implement Keep Connected, starting out with the Keep Connected Institute. And then we had 6 of our local agencies actually test the pilot as a pilot project, the Keep Connected Parent Engagement, really family engagement program, which is a 7-part series of lessons that really build up the capacity of adolescent families, just in terms of being able to serve families. And I'll let Gene talk more about that later, because I know that's his baby. But first year we pilot tested it. Second year we made some adjustments, and also our agencies focused on building out their wraparound service directory, being able to find those local partners. At that point, we got some really good insights going into the third year about that actual Keep Connected program. One of the things we found is the content was just incredible, and the families that went through the program were really transformed. But it was challenging, especially during COVID, obviously, to get families on a Zoom call on a regular basis, just because of all of the demands that they were facing at that time. So we made some adjustments to our approach through that. We actually gave our agencies some freedom to be able to try some other interventions. So we actually had our group that we expanded to 9 agencies, and some of them experimented with parent advisory committees. Others did parent academies, where there was a little bit more flexibility in terms of how the content was offered. We also were very fortunate through another grant that Search Institute had to offer the Unlocking the Potential of Family Engagement series. And this was a huge resource for our staff members, being able to get high quality training content on family engagement to build their capacity at the local level. And it really helped, I think, more than anything, generate some interest, kind of in this topic, because it was addressing obviously the challenges they were hearing from families through their match support at the local level as a result of COVID. And then you saw a video from our Good Habits series. One of the things we wanted to do, we recognized, that the content of developmental relationships is phenomenal, but we wanted to put it in the words of families, and that was a really important thing for us. And so we were able to use this as an educational tool for families, where we were taking, the content, and they were hearing real parents talk about how they implement it on the ground. So in the 4th year, we continued our pilot tested innovations. We also released a podcast series, which you'll see a link to in the handout. And that one was very focused on our bigs in terms of what are some strategies to best engage with parents as partners. And really had some great conversations through that series, and we've got quite a bit of interest. You can actually find it on iTunes and all the major platforms. We also did a tip sheet series for our staff on any role in your agency. What does it look like to do family engagement? And then we also implemented a family engagement champions committee, which was really helpful in informing our strategic plan going forward. And now this year, we're really excited. We will be doing some parent voice focus groups. We'll do a parent voice workshop and a parent voice toolkit, because we found that, of the innovations that were tested, there was a lot of interest around that. How do we get parent voice incorporated in our program decisions and even volunteer recruitment strategies as an agency? And so, to kind of sum up our approach, and, it's an evolving process, but, we really summarize it as ACT. It's starting with assessment with that RPI, and that's a way to assess family needs, which connects to wraparound service providing. And then we're also, the T part being teaching. We're teaching families, but we're also teaching staff, providing resources such as our video series, our podcast series, trainings for staff, so that we can really, help increase everybody's capacity in this area. And so now that leads into our panel discussions, the true experts with us today, Jennifer and Ellie. We'll walk through a series of questions and definitely encourage you to add additional ones in the chat on the CVent site. So question number 1, what is the difference between parent involvement and partnering with families? And we'll start with Jennifer.
I'll just start by saying that I believe the biggest difference between parent involvement and partnering with families is eliminating this feeling that parents are just a minor part of the match, someone that the big just has to discuss outings with, for example. For so long, this is how our agencies and bigs have often viewed families in our program. So if we're to really partner with families, we must get past this mindset and actually see parents as integral partners and not only a match, but in the agency as a whole. When we took an audit of our agency and really evaluated where our blind spots were, we realized that we were lacking in a critical area, and that was parent engagement. We were always good at inviting parents to participate in activities and training, but we realized that we were not truly engaging parents as partners with us. So we can invite families to a training, but I know as a mom myself that if I have a toddler in the room with me, then I'm not going to really be able to engage in the training or have a conversation with a trainer. So what we decided to do was to be proactive in eliminating known barriers to success for our parents to engage with us. We decided that if we were going to do a parent training, we were going to eliminate the following barriers. We were going to provide childcare for our families so that they would not have to worry about finding childcare themselves. We're going to give them dinner, and we're going to provide gas cards so that we were not asking them to do something financially to get to us so that they could have a training. We wanted to take that off their plates. We also realized how important it was for our parents' voices to be represented in policy decisions that we make as an agency. Currently, we have 2 parents that sit on our program committee, and that program committee works together to look at anything from form changes to voting on bigs of the year. They pick our scholarship recipients, our littles that receive scholarships through our agency, but most importantly, they really vote on policies for safety. We realized it would be a huge loss to not have a parent perspective when we reviews policies around everything from alcohol use to overnight visits or areas where a volunteer might be denied, and also introducing a voting seat on our board for a parent. So yeah, those are some great ways that you can get more parent engagement, not just parent involvement in your agencies.
Ellie, anything you'd like to add on that one?
Yeah, I think Jennifer covered a lot of really great examples. I think we mirrored a lot of that in our agency. I think the one thing that I would add is that for us, it took a little bit of a cultural shift. So for us, parent involvement was kind of checking a box. What are the things that we are requiring them to do? Is it filling out forms? Is it filling out surveys? Is it getting on a phone call? Is it showing up to different places? Those things that we as a program are inherently asking them to do, versus partnering with families is much more relationship based. So thinking about our own personal relationships, it's a two-way street. And we really take the approach that we know mentoring, and we want to think, and we know that we're pretty good at mentoring, but we're not experts on each individual family or each individual child, and those parenting adults and families are. So it's coming to the table with this, I guess, humility that we're not going to come with answers. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to work together to figure out what it is that you want and you need and you're seeking, and ways that we can help plug into those things. So I think it's just a little bit of a shift of how we think about the ways families kind of partner in our work.
Our second question, what are some key wins in your agency's family engagement work, and where have you struggled to engage parents and caregivers? We'll start with Ellie.
Yeah, I think one of the wins that we've had is in really kind of living that mindset of we're not the experts and we're not always going to have the answers. One of the examples that I can think of is a couple years ago, we really set out, as Tim mentioned earlier, to have a parent advisory committee. And so we had polled people, we had created invitations, we had created surveys, we had set out the times we thought would work for people, and it just didn't work. We had lots of conversations individually. We did all the things we thought we needed to do for it to be successful, and it wasn't. What we ended up doing, so that's like a good example of a struggle, right? Like we think we know what needs to happen, and it doesn't happen. What ended up happening was that we just took a step back, and we really kind of wanted to embody that principle. Like we would like for you to tell us kind of what you're looking for. And so it ended up looking really different. It ended up showing kind of being that families really wanted community building. I think it was Jean maybe mentioned who used some of the wording around wraparound relationships for families. And I think that's exactly what folks were looking for, building relationships. So a really big win there was that we had, gosh, I want to say 15 to 20 families show up to our office on a Saturday morning where we had sharing, we had games, we had food, we had childcare, we just had really good community time. And having people show up to things is a really good win. We've had lots of times where we invite people and they're not there, which means we've missed the mark. So a quick adaptation with some intentionality, really thinking about what we're trying to accomplish, was a really big one. So people showing up to things, people giving us honest feedback, people pushing back on things that we've always done. We consider those wins at our agency.
Yeah, just to add, Gene has a wonderful training on how to get families to come to activities. I know maybe he'll be able to share that in the chat for you. Jennifer, anything you'd like to add on this?
Yeah, I love that Ellie mentioned that maybe the surveys didn't work for her agency, but this is the great thing about these conversations, because that was actually a huge win for us, was a survey that we sent out to parents. So if you hear something might not work for someone else, don't believe that it won't work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, it may be great for someone else. So always be open-minded on those. So like I said, one of our biggest wins did involve a survey that we sent out to parents where we asked them what they as parents wanted to see offered and what would be really meaningful to them. So most of our family engagement ideas have actually come from that survey. So just wanted to give you some examples of some things that we've done. We were asked and provided an economic mobility series, and that was given to us through Bank of America. They came and worked with our families. We did a limits program, and that was through our local sexual assault center. That was something else that was really important for parents to be trained in. One of our biggest wins as far as getting parents to come to a training was a training that was on ACEs and how to de-escalate a crisis situation in your home. So if you have a child that maybe struggles with some behavior, how to start to de-escalate that situation when you see it start to rise. Families really appreciated that one. And similar to Ellie, we're going to start doing coffee socials in March because we've heard feedback that what they really want is just to speak to other parents and have network opportunities. So we're really excited to start that. We also reach out to our parents monthly with a newsletter that we just send out through email. And then twice a year, we also do a targeted parent postcard with events that we have coming up. And what we want to do is make sure to create opportunities where parents can participate with their child in events, whether they're waiting families or a matched family. So we invite all of our families together, whether their child is a little or not. So we do a back to school bash where we provide school supplies. That is always a huge, huge opportunity for us to get our families involved. We do monthly events with Sierra Club. If you have a Sierra Club in your local area, connect with them. They do monthly events with our littles. They take them on hikes in the mountains, and families can go. They get our littles into the synchronous firefly event, which is hard to get, but our littles are there every year and it's really exciting. And even just something as simple as doing a March Madness party where parents and kids can do brackets and compete against each other. That fun activity where parents feel like they can come and sit in our office and participate as part of the match itself.
That leads to our next question. How do you develop a culture of family engagement at your agency? And we'll start with you.
So I would say one of the biggest takeaways we had from the parent survey that I mentioned is that parents want us to listen to their needs and not just make an assumption that we know what their needs are. So this may seem like common sense, but when we stepped back and looked at what we were doing, we realized that we were just assuming needs and we weren't giving parents a space to share what would truly be beneficial to them. So part of developing that culture of family engagement now includes promoting opportunities for families for networking, giving them the opportunity to learn about upward job mobility, which I mentioned before, providing financial health and stability training. We moved away from looking at parents as just caregivers and really truly started viewing them as an integral part of the match and the agency, not just the match. They're part of our agency and part of our family as well. It's also important to show our funders the change in our perspective through using strengths-based language when providing match stories to our grant providers, making sure that we were not painting our families as victims and as littles that had hardships to overcome, but truly showing them as partners in the work of providing support for their children. So, and also when you engage your staff in using strengths-based language, it also helps to eliminate any bias that they might unintentionally be harboring towards parents as well, and to see them as incredibly important participants who can give great feedback on what's happening in the match and make us a better team overall.
Ellie, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, without repeating too much of the wonderful stuff Jennifer said, I think for us, it really started with asking questions. And it means asking questions about what this could look like of everyone involved in our agency. So it is, of course, asking our parenting adults and our families, but asking staff, asking our leadership, asking our board, having conversations with funders, with donors, with people who do our development and marketing, helping people really, I think, break some of the way we've worked before, kind of like Jennifer saying, assuming that we have the answer, assuming we know the need. I think just getting that out in the open and really having conversations around it was number one, and really being strengths-based and strengths-focused and seeing parenting adults and families as a really key contributor, not only in their family, but in our communities and in our work and in our organization. Asking questions and then actively listening and following up on that. Those, again, like Jennifer said, sounds like common sense, but just having conversations was really the starting point for us.
I'm going to skip the next question. Sake of time here. I was curious, how can you equip bigs to have stronger relationships with the littles' families? We'll start with Jennifer for this one.
So I think the best thing that we can do, and this is something that I think I've mentioned earlier, but we've got to move away from stereotyping parents as victims. We need to really make our bigs see parents as their partner in this endeavor to provide support to children in whichever program you guys are doing. So as a parent myself, I see how much trust our parents are putting in us as an agency and in the big, just to allow their child to go off with someone that they really don't know. So they want their children to have extra support to meet their dreams and are strong enough to recognize the need to engage community members in that effort. These conversations and mindset changes need to really start from the very beginning. So I mentioned using strengths-based language, Ellie did as well. So using that language in communication and how we discuss our families to our donors and grant providers, like I said, but we also need to use that same language with our bigs from the very beginning. It needs to be visible on our website. It needs to be visible on your marketing, whatever you have going on, you need to use that strengths-based language. We need to not be afraid to tell a mentor when their mindset is not correct and how they're viewing our families. And we need to reiterate that being a mentor isn't just about, getting rid of guilt or getting into that sorority or fraternity for your community hours or, I get this a lot in our agency. I just want to know what it's like to be a foster parent. So, I'm gonna be a big, and it's so much more than that. So really working closely with the child's parent or caregiver to ensure you're providing them with someone that they can look up to as a mentor, and really utilizing that partnership language so that everyone is on the same page. So really it's about using that language from the very beginning and setting that mindset of partnership versus coming in and saving a child from what they're going through.
Tim, if I have a second to add, I agree with all of that 100%. And I think it's really about helping mentors. Some of the language we use, and let me take a step, some of the language we use is families are really trusting us to do this really wonderful work. Gosh, they are actively reaching out for some additional supports or whatever the case may be. So thinking about the language we use is really crucial. Reminding bigs that this is a relationship. So be genuine, be authentic, be willing to be vulnerable with families too. It goes so much farther than beyond just you and your mentee, your little. For us, it's also reminding them that match relationships tend to be much more successful when parenting adult and mentor relationships are successful. And we know that our mentors are coming in wanting to have successful match relationships. And so we make sure they know that that's a key ingredient and really empowering. In our case, we see a lot of bigs will come to us and say, hey, I'm having a hard time with this, and want us to kind of mediate the situation, which we're happy to do, but it's empowering bigs to have that conversation with families and vice versa. And so it's helping them together kind of build a really strong relationship, and being really mindful of your language is such an important part of that.
And one last question before we open up to the audience. Obviously, Jennifer, Ellie, you've been doing this for a while. This didn't happen overnight. And it all can be maybe seem overwhelming for those that this is a brand new concept to. What are some practical next steps that you would encourage people to take?
So I don't mind to start with this one. I want to give a big plug to Allie Levitt. She's our match and family engagement manager. She has done so much work in this area. And if you would like to connect with her, I'm sure she'd love to talk to you about the pros and cons she's found in working with families and engaging them. So if you would like her information, I have passed that on so you guys can connect directly. I would say next steps, if you at all possible can find the funding to hire a match and family engagement role, that would be fantastic. So many of our grants do require a family engagement element as part of the deliverables. So ask for funding in your grant proposals for this type of position, because it is really hard to do this if you also have a match support queue, if you also are bringing in volunteers and getting them through the process. So really kind of having a dedicated person who is there for parents and listening to them is fantastic. If you can't do that step, I would look at starting a parent advisory council. This is a dream of ours. Ellie sounds like she has it in place. Kudos to them, where it's on our dream list. So we're looking at that. Again, and just finally, just to reiterate again, making sure that you have parents in places where their voices are heard in the important areas, policy change, safety issues. Give them a voting seat on the board so they can see the background workings of your agency and understand the hardships that we go through as well, so that they understand everything that's going on in the agency from a parent perspective and can give their thoughts on things that might make things better, or their feedback on ways that we can improve our services also.
Yeah, on the other side of that, I have to agree that if you don't have a designated person to do this work, it is really hard. And that's where our agency has been, and we are right now. We don't have one team member that does this. And so I understand that experience. So I think finding ways that you can increase this work little by little, the things that you're already doing, is really important. So for example, one of the things that we've started doing in our enrollment process is just asking more questions, thinking about what are you looking for out of this experience? Why did you choose our organization? What are the things that would be helpful to you? What are the things you're not looking forward to in this experience? And those were easy things that we could incorporate as we're talking to people, as we're already enrolling families into our programs. So there are little things along the way that you can do that make people feel really valued and included, and really kind of inches you towards really kind of robust family involvement. Partnership, excuse me. I think those are some easy things to consider. And talking about it as a team, one of the things that we come across against is our capacity. Everyone feels really tapped out. There's no way we can do this. So reminding folks that there are some easy wins along the way, celebrating them, and always keeping it as kind of a North Star helps. So collect information and then act on it.
And we did have a question from the audience. Can you give an example of how you describe those you serve using strength-based language?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we really describe our parents as strong supporters of their children, advocates for their children. They're advocating for their child to have another member come in from the community and engage them in ways that will help them grow. So it really is just putting really positive language around how the parent is working on this, just to even give their children even more opportunities.
I'll also add that we, especially when we're telling specific stories in a grant proposal, will really highlight other ways that parents and families have worked with other kind of, whether it's a provider or they're really connected in their community organizations, or kind of other things that they're doing in this kind of wanting to seek support. So really highlighting those other relationships, those other efforts, can go a long way too. But it's hard. I will tell you, that's a conversation we have regularly with our board, our development folks, or people that are doing any kind of marketing. That's a really hard thing to do.
And a couple things to kind of wrap it up, and then we'll close with the description of some resources you have available through the CVent platform. One, just value of dedicated staffing in this area. And you can't emphasize that enough. If you don't, it could be part of someone's role, but having kind of a coordinated point person to make those partnerships is key. A second thing is removing barriers to participation. Make it easy for families to get involved and make it fun. That's a big part of it as well. Provide opportunities for parents to have input, parent voice. And with that, it doesn't have to be a formal parent advisory committee. That may be a goal for you as an organization in the long term. But how can you incorporate parent voice into things that you're already doing? How can you make it simple for people to give their feedback? And then, just overall, I mean, provide value to families. If you're asking them to give their valuable time to you, why is it going to be valuable for them? Use that always kind of as a guiding question. Now, the resources available through the platform. One, you'll see on the left-hand side, there are BBBSA Search Institute resources. So that includes both the Good Habits series as well as a link to our podcast series, which is available on all the major platforms. You'll also see Search Institute's Resource Hub, which is a phenomenal tool that has all kinds of great things, including staff-specific, depending on your role, resources. Second thing, you'll see a tip sheet called Relationship-Centered Partnerships with Families. This is a phenomenal tool as well, just to help guide some of those conversations with staff. And then last, you'll see a description of the developmental relationships. You can see that we are at time, so we'll close there. I want to thank everyone for participating and would encourage you to continue the conversation both on the platform and online. And we do, let me put up our contact info here as well. We would love to hear from you. How are you doing this on the ground? This is always kind of something, we don't have it all figured out. We have a lot to learn as well. So please feel free to reach out to us.